John Stocks is executive director of the National Education Association. He was the featured speaker at a human rights banquet in the Pacific Northwest about a week ago. What I found interesting, and just happening across an article on this whole thing, was the fact that he spoke on the topic of institutional racism. Now, NEA, of course, is the National Education Association. Welcome back to Steel on Steel. John Lufter here with you. And as I read through this little article, hearing him speak about the concept of institutional racism, I couldn't figure out, I was sitting at a little coffee shop, I couldn't figure out whether it was an LOL moment, a laughing out loud, or a BUV moment. I've created a new term we can use on texting called barfing up violently. Because when you recognize that if we talk about institutional racism, no one organization has contributed more to propagating institutional racism than the National Education Association, because it has opposed every meaningful reform that would change the condition of inner city schools and schools for minorities that would have a real impact to give them a leg up. It has kept millions of minorities, especially African Americans, trapped in horrible schools because it has opposed any kind of meaningful reform because it's against its agenda. It's a political organization. It has very little to do with education. And so this was a BUV moment, which I laughed a lot about as I was doing it. Okay, now, why is this important? I want you to take the idea of institutional racism, and I want to talk about free speech everywhere. We can tie together different stories. Former Boston Red Sox pitcher and ESPN baseball analyst Curt Schilling hurled some hard ones, according to a Breitbart article. On a satellite radio program, Schilling was asked about what it was like to move from professional sports to ESPN, where he was told what to say and how to say it. And he said, it was apparent to me early on that if you wanted to go off topic as a sports person, you had to go off topic to the left or you were going to get in trouble. Why is that? That's because the new left, the politically correct established left, has become the new bullies on the block. No matter what the issue happens to be, whether it's boycott, divest sanctions, Black Lives Matter, whether it happens to do with various same-sex issues, you have to mouth the party line. Where does this all lead us? Last week, Nazimuddin Samad sat at his computer at home in Bangladesh and penned a few critical lines against the Islamist drift of his country. The day after, Samad was approached by four men shouting, you'll never guess, Allahu Akbar. They hacked him to death with machetes. These killings have become routine in Bangladesh, where many bloggers, journalists, and publishers are being killed in broad daylight because of their criticism of Islam. There's actually a hit list with 84 names of, quote, satanic bloggers. So there has been a wave of terrorists against journalists there. Now, in Europe, you haven't seen a trace of that in any of Europe's newspapers. And that's because the European papers self-censor based on politically correct norms. And so when you have bullying going on in places such as Saudi Arabia and Bangladesh and other things that happen, say, to women inside of the Islamic world, in the politically correct world of the West, we can't say that. Even if it's true, we self-censor because that would make us bullies or intolerant or uncaring. And so they self-censor themselves. Well, they sort of self-censor because in some cases they're being forced to censor themselves. And so what it is it's a confusion between who the bullies and the bullies are. See, the problem we have in the West is after the Enlightenment and Reformation and the idea of being able to express and to adhere to your ideas and to argue them out in rational debate and discourse, we champion this idea of free speech. Europe isn't as big into free speech right now. They're trying to kill it. Over here, we still have it. Well, Canada doesn't have it as much because Canada's moving in the direction that Europe is going, but the Canadians don't care right now. And so we have here in the United States the First Amendment to the Constitution, which asserts the right to free speech. Let's go to Saudi Arabia. Raif Badawi was sentenced to 1,000 lashes and 10 years in jail and a fine of the equivalent of $270,000 United States currency for blogging thoughts such as, quote, my commitment is to reject any repression in the name of religion, a goal that we will reach in a peaceful and law-abiding way, end quote. The lashing order added that he should be lashed very severely. Just repeat to yourself, religion of peace, religion of peace. Don't you feel better about him being lashed 1,000 times now? I do. You see, the reason we have free speech in a Western free culture is that free speech is essential to exchanging ideas, to finding out what is right, to finding out what works, especially in the area of science, where it's also dying. There have been a number of articles written recently showing how the real peer review system is dying and falling prey to consensus. Everything is falling prey to consensus. Why do we have to have consensus? Well, let's take a look at what was going on in Germany over the last week or two. Very famous comedian there, Jan Böhmermann, mocked and insulted Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan on a television show recently. Guess what? The prosecutor of Mainz just opened a case against Böhmermann under paragraph 103 of the German Penal Code, which provides up to 5 years in prison for insulting a foreign head of state. Surprise, surprise, our friend, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, sided with the Turks. She condemned the comedian's poem and called it a deliberate insult, and then approved the prosecution against him. What happens here is the fact that you still have the right to do it here in this country. In Europe, they're straddled halfway between what they do in Islam, they just kill you, versus prosecuting you for saying things that are politically incorrect, like insulting a leader or insulting Islam. As a matter of fact, Iran's foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, just released an interview with Italy's largest newspaper, Il Corriere della Sera, where he suggested a kind of grand bargain. He said, "We Iranians will discuss with you our human rights situation if you Europeans suppress freedom of expression on Islam." He said, "Human rights are reason for concern for everyone. We are ready to dialogue. We shall make our observations on alienation of the Muslim communities in many European societies, or how freedom of expression is abused to desecrate the symbols of Islam." Translation, shut those people up, will you? Now, bear in mind also that the people today telling us that we have to self-censor when we talk about Islam or some other minority group is the same group that had open season on Christianity in academia and the media for the last 50 years. So let's come back to the United States. Having said all of that, look up there on the whiteboard. We have institutional racism clicked up there. And the real question is, what is a politically correct activist going to do? I mean, when somebody in this country says something politically incorrect, we can't hack you to death with machetes. Oh, we would love to do that, but we can't. We can't imprison you like they're trying to do for people who speak out in Europe about topics which are politically incorrect. Remember, truth is never the issue in these prosecutions. Truth is never the issue. You can be 100% correct in what you're saying, but it's a question of whether you have violated the politically correct standard, usually is dictated by the state. Does this smack of communism or fascism to you? Well, it should, because that's precisely what it is. And over here, the brown shirts, who are trying to do the same thing, but have this doggone impediment called the First Amendment to the Constitution, guaranteeing free speech, are left only a couple of weapons that they try to employ. Number one, and this you see going on college campuses under the boycott, divest, sanctions movement, intimidate people, shout them down, yell them down, push, shove, make sure that their posters are torn down. All sorts of things that Hitler's brown shirts did in 1920s Germany. Just want to make sure you understand that is fascism. The problem is that doesn't go over too well. The other people start yelling back. So what they have to do is create a system of what is called self-censorship. And institutional racism is one of these areas of self-censorship whereby they create a fiction, institutional racism. It is designed to be a shaming mechanism in which certain groups of people are forced to shut up while other groups of people get to freely speak. And the game is rigged so that you can't win, you can't break even, and for the most part, they don't want to let you out of the game. And they're very frustrated right now that many of us are saying, you know, I don't think we're really too thrilled with this game. We're just not going to play it anymore. Now, the way the games are rigged, whether it's a racist game or a homophobe game or any of these games, it's institutional fill in the blank. It's about defaming your opponents. Remember, they're talking about tolerance, diversity, caring, safe spaces. And at the very same time, they flip and do just the opposite, defaming opponents with the intention of driving them from the public square so that only the party that perceives itself as being the champions of decency and compassion will be left standing. Are we really a racist country? Think about it. We've twice elected a black president. We've recently had a black 4-star general head the Joint Chiefs of Staff, 2 black secretaries of state, 3 black national security advisors, and 2 successive black attorneys general, along with thousands of black and other minority elected officials, mayors, police chiefs, and congressmen. It's a fiction, but they need the fiction to create the dialectic to divide us, and they have done it well. Look how divided we are. But the goal is to suppress freedom of speech and the expression of ideas against which they cannot provide reasoned responses. Lacking reasoned responses, they resort to 2 logical fallacies: ad hominem, attacking the person and trying to destroy him or her, or ad baculum, using a club. Either way, they're still fallacies. If you and I don't stand up to this thuggery every time it occurs, then free speech, and with it freedom, will slowly die. It's dying in Europe, and in the other English language countries around the world, it's under assault. I will not sit down. I will not shut up. I'm just not going to play that game anymore. We're at SteelOnSteel.com. I'm John Leffler. The program is Steel on Steel.